This program was brought to you by Koller Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.
The idea of deep innovation for us is a year-long effort, as the President said, and Moshe, it's a start. I'm not going to delve into this whole model. The key is just to outline the four actors as we see them. The number, we'll start actually from the bottom, the entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs are the ones that are coming up with the ideas. They are generating the new notions, the new ideas that creates. Each of these things is either one idea or a family of ideas to be covered. Then we have the people who are actually putting money into it, the venture capital. And this is an umbrella term for all the people that actually look at the innovator, at the entrepreneur, and give them the money to push things forward. Again, stems from our assumption that if you put in money into something, you'll get it faster, bigger chances of success. Beyond them, we have the institutional investors. And this is an important point, especially for us in Israel. We're not so familiar with this. But at the end of the day, the people with a lot of money, as Jeremy would like to call them, the pension funds. Of course, that's one term. But the pension funds are the one that symbolizes the people who actually put money inside the venture capital firms, and they allow them. Now, if the pension funds are not getting, at the end of the day, returns from the venture capital, they're not going to put money into it. And if not put money into venture capital, they're not going to get money into entrepreneurs. So that's the challenge. These are the third. And the fourth, and perhaps the most important player, as we learned from Robin, right? We'll talk about it in a second, is the public authorities, which is a nice term for governments, essentially. Because at the end of the day, it is government that create the infrastructure for the entire ecosystem. When we talk about public authorities, because it can also be citywide or region-wide, etc. If we look carefully at each of them, you'll see that there is a certain value chain. And this is the value chain that we chose. Probably there's some other ways to represent it. The reason I'm showing this, because when we talk about a venture ecosystem for deep innovation, we are looking at new definitions, new structures, different structures for these value chains, essentially. We're looking to restructure, rebuild, re-understand the specific value chains in the game. And I just show you these two, but of course you can come up with your own. So that's the challenge that we have here. Why do we have a framework? Why do we need this framework? The framework is really a way for us to name the different phases. So we are all on a common base. It's just a mechanism. You may change the different names of the phases, etc., but the principle is what counts. So that's the first thing. It basically allows us to understand the internal dynamics within each value chain. What is the source of the ideas? And surprisingly, when Ram Weisbord here from Teva is going to talk about his thing, without us talking to each other, he also talks about value chains. Because if you understand the value chains and where value being created, you can modify it, you can change it to adapt to new conditions. We also understand the relationship between the value chains. What affects, why is some of the limited partners today are investing directly in entrepreneurs, which is something they have not done in the past. And we can see several trends and changes. And let me give you just one example, which I think symbolizes or epitomizes the changes that we see now in the value chain. And this is the example of Intellectual Ventures. Intellectual Ventures is a fund out of Seattle that essentially deals with ideas. Anybody here familiar with Intellectual Ventures? Excellent. So what do they do? Oh, okay, Shmuel, of course. What do? They encourage people to come up with interesting ideas. Once they come up with the idea, they simply pay them just for the idea. Right, Shmuel? Shmuel is one of the most prolific inventors. And you come up with the idea, and you get the money for it, and that's it. How much money do you get for an idea? Depends. Okay. So we don't need to start up companies. We don't need to publish papers. We just need to come up with ideas. This is a very big change because on one hand, it encourages the entrepreneurs to just stay in the idea level. It enables many more people to come into the area of innovation. And on the other hand, if you are a company, you don't need to invent the idea. You can just go to their website and license the idea. Big, big change. Intellectual ventures, we can talk about them later. And this is one example of a change on this wonderful ecosystem. I had many questions about what is deep innovation. So this is a time for a little confession. I want to confess here. We just invented this term. We thought it's a very good term, but it already got, so we try to define it. Again, for the purposes of this workshop, and I'm sure we can realign this definition. Deep innovation is somewhere in the middle. What does it mean in the middle? Look at the example. I think that's the best way to think about it. On one hand, we have web things and maybe cyber and applications and internet stuff and maybe IT, enterprise software, things like that. These are things that are relatively easy. On the other hand, we have huge things like CERN or NASA. In the middle, we have deep innovation. It's very simple. So it's the amount of money, it's how many years it takes, it's the risk, and it's the potential value. So for the purposes of today, and I'm sure by the end of the day we may define it in a different way, for the purposes of today, this is deep innovation. How are we going to attack this with all the very smart people that we have gathered in the room? So we start with a very clear question. I think this is a very important point. The question is very clear. We bring lots of good people to the room, and I think this is your part, right? Thank you very much for coming. We will start with a short overview of the state of venture. We have Ellie and Robin giving us from different perspectives. I will introduce them in a second. We continue with 8 examples, and you see the examples over here. Jonathan is going to run that section, and this is something that we have done in the last 3 months with the people who are the leaders of the Brain and Nano initiative. These will be our small case studies to think about, and every one of them is extremely interesting. Then we work in groups. Each of the groups here will actually get one of the posters led by the leader, and the scientist, the researcher behind this is going to be in the group to assist you in thinking about this. So the actual example is going to be the way to think about deep innovation. What do you need? What are some of the characters that you need in order to do that? We reflect and think at the end with Jeremy and the panelists at the end after we hear the summary from the group leaders. And of course, we'll continue to work. I see this definitely as something that we will continue to think about. What we plan to do approximately in a year is to develop a collection of policy recommendations on deep innovation. Basically, from the people who are here, I'm sure there's going to be lots of ideas and people that would like to express their opinions. And the way the Institute works is that we summarize this into a special issue. I will show to you in a second. It's basically a publication which you will all get at 5 o'clock as a part of the reception. This publication will allow you to see the kind of work that we are doing further to summarize topics. And of course, I want us all to have fun during the day with lots of good food and good companies. So that's more or less the plan of the day. Few minor things, technical things, just to make sure everybody on the same page before I will call the first speaker. So, a timetable. So we have a very strict timetable. We want to accomplish a lot. Don't worry, I'll follow that. Don't worry about that. We have work time that will allow all of us to get to know each other more. We are now already sitting in the groups, and we will continue to do over lunch and then backward in the summary. I want to remind everybody with the phones, you can either set them on silent or do something like that. We will try to operate on Chatham House rules, which means you can say whatever you want, but nobody can quote you. That's the bottom line here. We will try to have fun all the way. And I think the bottom line is that once I brought everybody to the room, then my job is over. I think I'm bringing you to the floor to get your ideas and generate some new and interesting insight. Welcome, and thank you very much for being with us. Thank you. Last thing, if you see somebody with yellow, it means that you can ask them questions, right? People here? Yes, 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 people here with yellow. These are people, Odea, etc., etc. Eli, I want to welcome Professor Eli Talmor. Eli Talmor is a professor of the London Business School and founding chairman of our institution. Now, you know, there are all kinds of chairmen. Eli is the kind of chairman who actually does work, and a lot of it. So he's leading the initiative on what we call the history of venture. And I've asked him to give us a brief on this thing, and through that, give you the kind of work that we're doing. Eli, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This program was brought to you by Koller Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.